So this up here, CS exclamation point equal sign programming, that means computer science does not equal programming. That exclamation point means not. That is a very common sort of syntax thing that you might type in a computer program to say not. So to say not equal, you do exclamation point equal sign. So computer science does not equal programming. I thought we were here to learn programming though, right? Yes, you are. This is the Intro to Programming course. That said, I did want to spend a little bit of time today talking about this broader term called computer science. So computer science is the study of what computers do currently and what they could potentially do in the future. Programming, on the other hand, is the practical application of making computers do things. So they're pretty similar. I will admit that. The words that I'm using in both these definitions are very similar words. But the key takeaway here is computer science is a very broad subject, and then programming is just one particular part of computer science, and it's specifically the part where you carry out stuff in practice. So again, programming is just a subset of computer science. Computer science has a lot of different areas in it, more than just programming. Here are a couple of those areas. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them, but I will say if at any point any of these words or any other area of computer science jumps out at you and you want to talk more about it, send me an email. Talk to me during office hours. I am more than happy to talk about computer science. I spent a lot of time in school studying this subject in a lot of different areas, and I am more than happy to talk about more than just programming if that is something you are interested in doing. That said, a couple things that I will point on it here, just for fun. When I went to grad school, my focus was in algorithms and theory and cryptography. Those are two sort of mathy areas of computer science. And later this quarter, we will actually be doing some cryptography, which I promise is a lot of fun. I'm not just making you do it because it's something that I did, but it's actually a pretty cool thing. Don't worry. Couple other areas of computer science I want to point out. Artificial intelligence and machine learning. These are two areas that have recently been really, really popular. And machine learning in particular is a very new and upcoming thing. And machine learning is something that is often done in Python, which we'll get to in a little bit, but Python is actually what we're going to be learning in this course. So if that is something of interest to you, you'll be in a good spot after this class to dive more into it. That said, these areas, these are just a couple of the very many areas of computer science. Computer science as a field is a relatively new topic. You know, compared to math, for example, which has been around for thousands of years, computer science has been around for maybe 50 or so years. So it's quite possible that the fields that will be popular 10, 20 years from now don't even exist yet. So again, programming is just one small part of computer science. Programming is the actual act of designing and implementing computer programs. Computer programs are basically sets of instructions that you tell a computer to do, and that tells the computer to do a specific task. Now again, this course is Intro to Programming. We will mostly be talking about programming in this class. I realize, that's what you're here for. We're going to learn to code, we're going to learn to program. But do keep in mind, especially if this is something that you want to pursue more of a field, computer science does talk a lot more than just programming. Again, programming is just one small part of computer science. Of course, it is a very important and practical part. Alright, a couple more pieces of terminology I want to talk about before we get into course logistics. So there's these two terms, software and hardware. These are probably terms that you've heard been thrown around quite a bit when people are talking about computers. So let's just define them really quick. Software is basically the computer program. So anything that you write with code, anything that you run on your computer, like Microsoft Word, Safari, Firefox, all of those programs, those are all software. Software is basically a computer program. On the other hand, hardware refers to the physical devices that make up a computer. So this is stuff like the screen of your computer, the mouse, the keyboard, the chips that are internally stored in your computer. All that fun stuff, that's all hardware. So hardware is the physical parts of the computer, and software is the programs that run on a computer. Now, of course, these two things, as you can imagine, they go hand in hand. They kind of have to work together to get things done. I will say, if you are more interested in hardware than software, computer engineering might be a field that you might be interested in. So computer science generally, in addition to all those areas that I talked about, computer science generally talks more about the software side of things rather than the hardware side of things. Computer engineering, on the other hand, refers to more of the hardware side of things. Now, of course, both sides have to sort of talk to each other. So if you do a full-fledged computer science degree, you will do a couple classes in hardware. And at the same time, if you do a full-fledged computer engineering degree, you'll do a couple classes in software. It's important to know a little bit of both sides. But again, that said, this class, our primary focus is going to be writing software, writing programs. We will talk a little bit about how stuff is stored on the computer, how data is stored on the computer, and that gets a little bit into the hardware side of things, but we won't get too far into the hardware side of things in this class. That said, the book does cover hardware stuff a little bit more in Chapter 1, so do take a look at that for a more in-depth overview. Alright. Let's talk about programming languages. So programming languages are kind of like normal languages that we're used to, right? Humans have their own languages. We have English, we have Spanish, we have French, we have thousands of languages, right? Computers also have a lot of different languages. And these are essentially what programming languages are. Programming languages are a way for humans to interact with computers. It's sort of a translation between human language and how the computer itself thinks. And there's a bunch of different ways to translate it depending on what language you're using, right? If I'm talking to someone who speaks French, there's a translator between me and the French-speaking person who converts my words into French. In the same way, there are a lot of different programming languages that will convert my words into these different programming languages. So again, programming language, think of it as just like a normal human language. There's a lot of different types of them. There's many different kinds. Why are there so many? Well, they sort of are born out of a need. There will be someone who wants to program something. They're like, hey, I really want a language that does this, this, and this, but that doesn't exist yet, so I'm going to make up my own. That's really why there are so many. Some programming languages are closer to how the computer thinks. Some are closer to English or human languages. And then there's a whole subset of languages that are in between. It's very much a spectrum, programming languages, from human languages to how the computer thinks. Here are a lot of the more common programming languages. So this class is specifically using Python, which is the one in the middle of the screen there. A couple other ones that I'll pull out. Java. So if you continue taking the CSC series at North Seattle College, if you take CSC 142, 143 after this course, those are both taught using Java. Out of all of these, the most common languages are going to be Python, Java, and JavaScript. Python is a really, really popular language now, which is awesome because that's what we're learning. Java has been around for about 30 years now. Python's quite new. Python's only been around for about 15 years. Java's been around for 30 to 40 years now. Something interesting, Java and JavaScript, those are not related at all. They just have similar names. JavaScript is a programming language that you would use a lot if you do any web development, but I'm rambling a bit here. Key takeaway here is there are a lot of different programming languages. We will specifically be using Python. So whenever you're looking at stuff related to Python, something to keep in mind is there are generally multiple versions of each language. This is just like any software, right? When you run your computer, sometimes you'll have software updates that you have to download and install. Programming languages also have updates. Python specifically, the current version is Python 3. So I do want to take a little bit of time now to sort of point out if you're ever researching stuff online or looking stuff up on your own, make sure when you're looking at Python specific stuff for this class, we are using Python 3. We are not using Python 2. There is a significant difference between the two, so please make sure when you install Python and when you're looking at Python stuff, you're looking at Python 3, not Python 2. Now, that said, Python is just sort of going to be a means to an end in this case, meaning, yes, we are using Python as the language for this course, but the idea is once you take this course, you should, in theory, be able to go and maybe with a little bit of Googling, a little bit of reading, go and program in other languages. And the reason for that is all the programming languages, they'll have the same sort of foundational things. Just like how in human languages, regardless of what language you speak, all languages have nouns and verbs and, sentence structure and stuff like that. It's the same thing with programming languages. They all have very similar building blocks. They'll just look a little bit different. One of the reasons we are using Python specifically for this class is, how earlier I talked about that spectrum of programming languages and how some are more like how humans speak and some are more like how computers think. Python is on the end of the spectrum that is closer to how humans think, so it's much easier to learn, especially for beginners. The other reason we're using Python is because Python is actually used in industry. So if you go to companies, real companies, Apple, Google, Microsoft, they use Python. Now, granted, it might be on different scales depending on the company, but Python is like a real language that companies use. There are some languages that, are considered quote-unquote easier languages like Python, but maybe aren't used as much in industry. So Python is a really cool one to start with because it is a quote-unquote easier language to learn, but it is also used in industry. So the stuff that you're learning in this class, you can go and take it with you to work.